welcome to OffScript, the HAI Vodcast. This is Vanessa Parli. I'm Wang, and this quarter we are piloting this three-part human-centered AI Vodcast. It's a sort of a hybrid podcast, live audience, and seminar series. And through the series, we hope to interrogate ourselves and one another on what we really want from artificial intelligence. And so good to see all of y'all here, and also to say hi to those out there on the interwebs tuning in. We always begin with just a short reading of the HAI Vodcast preamble that Vanessa and I put together, just to kind of set the stage a bit for this conversation today. We live in a time when advancements in AI technology are shaping our world while critically outpacing our understanding of this technology in various humanistic contexts: cultural, social, ethical, historical. Look at us. We're Stanford, one of the most powerful academic institutions located in the heart of Silicon Valley. And yet, it is all too easy to be in a profound bubble. Much of the world knows and cares about AI far less or far differently than we might assume. It is also all too easy to be sure of ourselves. As the technology creators, while remaining out of touch with the rest of the world, we tell ourselves that more technology is the solution, for technology is what we know, and we're eager to apply our craft. Unfortunately, it's all too easy to do so with a shallow understanding of the social, cultural, historical contexts, while not even considering the possibility that problems in the world are seldom lack of technology problems, but entrenched human problems, including technology itself. But of course, we keep moving fast because that is good for business. Even when we, quote, design tech for social good, we too often just end up making something slightly more convenient. Because slightly more convenient fits the prevailing economic narrative. This is the bubble, the technology cave we don't know we are living in. We need to interrogate ourselves to better understand how we as individuals and as communities would want to live with AI technology, and through our creations, how we might want to live with one another. We'll seek distinctions between intelligence and wisdom. Working definition intelligence, we'll say, is having the means to achieve what you desire, and wisdom, on the other hand, is perhaps having the capacity to assess your desires in the first place and to assess the means to achieve those desires. So we ask again, what do we really want from it all? And finally, perhaps above all, what does it mean to do AI with some heart and compassion? And that is our HAI Vodcast preamble.
So today's episode is around what we really want from AI in the creative world. As I'm sure many of you know, recent developments in AI, specifically generative AI, vision and language models, have enabled technology to write and generate imagery in ways that we previously thought only humans could do. And this has led to a moment of introspection about what it means to be creative, given these new capabilities, and what creativity really represents. With these questions of creativity come questions around labor, copyright, whether the image and text generated should even count as art, and how we center artists in this conversation. These are all really big questions. We are not planning to cover all of this today. We will be focusing on small bits, reflecting on what it means to be creative. But for those of you who are interested in the bigger questions, HAI has done other events focusing on other parts of this conversation. So quick plug for our YouTube channel. Yeah, with that.
Yeah, well, so I have a question, Vanessa. What in the world is creativity anyway?
So I don't know. And I continue to perhaps change my perspective as as I am part of more and more of these conversations. But one thing that I keep thinking about is in one of our first podcast episodes, an audience member came up at the end and was talking about how when the electric guitar was first established and the first musicians started using the electric guitar, a lot of people were like, that's not music. You can't do that. Like, that doesn't count. And now we don't even question it. Like, if someone uses an electric guitar, it's music, and that's fine. And I wonder if It'll be a similar situation with some of these, especially like vision models and the art that comes out or pictures that come out of the models. Like, if I don't know how our views, I think, will change.
That's interesting, Vanessa, because for one, the electric guitar, that was my instrument before I turned to the dark side of computer music. But I still play my guitar, and I play a lot of computer music. I thought I'd go to the dictionary for this one. So I went to Merriam-Webster and I typed in creativity. It says, like, basically a state of being creative. I'm like, that's not helpful. So look up creative. I get these three definitions. One, marked by the ability or power to create. I guess it's in the word, given to creating. For example, the creative impulse, a creative genius. Two, having the quality of something created rather than imitated. Imaginative, something to do with imagination, the creative arts, which also actually sounds kind of weird. It's like, what art is not creative? I have to wonder. Creative writing, same. What writing? I always thought to be kind of redundant to say creative writing. You shouldn't all write. Anyway, so these are, and then there's three, which I find also very interesting. Managed so as to get around legal or conventional limits, as in creative financing, also deceptively arranged so as to conceal or defraud. Creative accounting. So yeah, so what do y'all, I wonder what y'all think about this. Y'all got the note cards there. Please feel free to write down some answers and questions and things. And I was actually
shocked by that last one. I had no, I think I find it quite hilarious.
I mean, it is quite hilarious in the sense that I think all of these seem to be, there's a common thread between all of these three facets of this definition, which seem to be something about finding ways to, like, maybe break rules, right? Something about rule breaking. And there are times when we assign blame when rules are broken. Other times we say that's really creative in a good way. So actually in the last episode, Vanessa, we actually talked about this thing here, which, this is an iconic work of art today. Back in 1917, when Duchamp, took a urinal, turned it on its side, put it on a pedestal, entered into an art exhibit, gave it a name, Fountain. That's more than a century ago. Now, I went to Wikipedia. I'm all full of these just primary sources today.
Like ChatGPT.
I forgot about ChatGPT, actually. Ironically, I went to Wikipedia and I get this particular blurb here. Just in December 2004, Duchamp's Fountain was voted the most influential artwork of the 20th century by 500 selected British art world professionals. Second place was, beat out Picasso and Warhol. The Independent noted in a February 2008 article that with this single work, Duchamp invented conceptual art and, quote, severed forever the traditional link between the artist's labor and the merit of the work. Now that is quite an interesting definition, I think, for conceptual art, is it not? Because this is such a, and if you think about it, in this day of prompt-based AI engineering, it seems like that's kind of what we're doing in a sense. If we conceptualize it and put it into words and prompt the system, and the system maybe will generate you the thing. And at the same time, I mean, I'm thinking about conceptual art. One is like, what if everyone only made conceptual art? What kind of world is that like? Two, the thing about conceptual art seems to be that you can't really like do the same thing twice. I can't take a toilet today and put it on a pedestal and say, like, this is my work of art. Or in my field of music, right? Composer John Cage famously had this piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Some of y'all might know this piece. This is a piece in which they're musicians, they'll go on stage, but they don't actually play anything. They sit there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And in that, are all kinds of other questions arise to the nature of what is a musical performance, what does it constitute? And in many ways, people who are in performances 4 minutes and 33 seconds, they're listening, actually, not necessarily to the instruments per se, but they're listening to everything else. The shuffling of the audience in their seats, the din in the room, maybe people coughing. In many ways, it could be interpreted as a piece about the negative space of performance. But Vanessa, I can't be like, hey, people, I have a new piece. It's called 5 minutes and 11 seconds. And I'm premiering it right now. Actually, I'm not, but I could do that, but then you'd be like, no, good, that's not very interesting. That's not very creative.
Well, and everyone is so different, right? Like, I mean, how many times have you been to an art museum and someone's like, I don't understand, but other people are so moved by it. So, yeah, I guess it's this idea that we're all different. So how can we have one definition of what is?
Exactly. And it's like, there seems like this word creative is actually it can be used in so many different ways and it means different things to different people in different contexts. So I guess, I don't know, where does all this leave us?
So yeah, I think this is probably a good time to bring up our guest today. We are very excited to welcome Srinija Srinivasan. She is a co-founder of Love, a developing music venture designed to demonstrate how commerce and technology can be guided by artistic values rather than letting culture be led by market values. In 1995, Srinija joined Yahoo as their 5th employee and self-titled Ontological Yahoo to lead the organization and evolution of Yahoo Directory. As vice president, editor-in-chief, she led a range of editorial and policy functions globally, including network editorial standards, privacy, data use, advertising standards, youth safety, community guidelines, accessibility, and corporate responsibility. Srinija serves as the vice chair of Stanford University's Board of Trustees and was recently a membership to the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty and has chaired the nonprofit SF Jazz, which is wonderful. If none of you have seen SF Jazz, they're great. She's also a Stanford alumni from the Symbolic Systems program. So let's welcome Srinija to our stage. And we also have Isabel Avant. She is currently a senior in the Symbolic Systems program at Stanford. So we have 2 Symbolic Systems alumni here. We'll get into that in a second. She believes in the power of narrative to shape companies and technological futures. Isabel has many interests, including the media tech landscape, turning stories into products, and how data and community can supercharge creators of all kinds. She has done AI ethics work at the Center for Research on Foundation Models, PA'd philosophy of AI here at Stanford, and even produced a documentary about minimalism in Gen Z that premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. She co-leads a working group designing generative AI systems to positively augment human creativity and runs Embeddings, which is an interview series exploring how generative AI is shaping how we create and consume culture. So I also recommend you all to look up Embeddings. Let's welcome Isabel. So our first segment is Origin Stories, where we ask our guests to talk a little bit about themselves, where they come from, how they came to this work. But before we get into that, because both of our guests are from the Symbolic Systems program here at Stanford, and as a non-Stanford graduate, when I first came here, I had no clue what that even meant. I was wondering if one of you might do a quick little brief on what that program is all about.
I do this all the time because no one knows what Symbolic Systems is, and sometimes to my dentist I give a cop-out answer, but the full one is that SybSys is a program that combines computer science, philosophy, psychology, and linguistics. And I think you can take it any way you want to. And for me, it's really become a philosophy of mind major. My concentration is human-centered AI, and most of the courses that I've really dug into have been in the philosophy space.
And I'll say for me, at the intersection of those 4 subject matters, those disciplines, were some really endlessly profound and animating questions about what is the relationship between language and intelligence, between language and cognition in a human being. So to what degree is the nature of what we know and how we can know both made possible by and limited by our language? You understand a thing better when you have a word for a thing. If you have lots of words for a thing, how does that change? How do different languages give rise to different kinds of intelligence? And then in the machine, what kind of artificial intelligence would arise from artificial machine language? And that foundation of questioning goes, for me, to part of what we're talking about today in contrasting ways of knowing.
I think what's special about Synthesis is that it encourages you to take all these different disciplines into these questions, as opposed to just approaching it from a technical perspective or a psychology perspective. All of a sudden, like, I don't know, the world has opened up.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go into origin story. So let's start with you, Srinija. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background and what brought you here today?
I'm here today because Gu made a beautiful invitation, and I have a practice of saying yes because I always get something out of dialogue with Gu. And these questions are at the center of everything I think about. I'm the youngest child, so my origin story is I'm the youngest child. Like, I feel like if you know that, you know most things about me. I was born downstream of a lot of love, and I was born in India, raised in Kansas. So I grew up in this very osmotically, not explicitly Hindu cosmology in a implicitly, not explicitly Christian frame. Okay, Midwestern, secular, liberal Lawrence, Kansas. And that is very formative, is playing with the things that came up in that contrast. And I think on some level, I've always been a student of consciousness. So symbolic systems was an unbelievable bucket basket of stuff where I didn't have to pick one major and they would call it a major. And I could put all of these things together. I didn't mean to go into tech, but I found myself in tech on the front row of a roller coaster at the inception of the web as the fifth employee at what would become Yahoo. Because I had just come from a large-scale AI project, my first job out of college, the Psych project, where we were trying to build a machine that has all of human common sense knowledge. And it was kind of a last holdout of symbolic logic in AI at that time. And the inception of Yahoo was this heterogeneous database full of information about anything and everything on the fledgling web, and how might we impose some kind of useful structure or order onto this database to be of use. And that was a very humanistic role in a technological industry. And I stayed for 15, 16 years, and it formed all kinds of questions for me about the nature of art and commerce and consciousness and technology, and where do these things serve each other and where do they diminish each other.
Isabel, do you want to talk about?
Yeah. My origin story, I met Gu and Vanessa because I'm working on the podcast with them outside of this. But my interest in creativity comes from probably being surrounded by art as a kid. My mom is an art historian by training, and I spent so many hours in museums. And then I did a lot of film work in high school and spent time working on sets. And really, as Vanessa said, I'm intrigued by storytelling and how stories can change our perspective. And then I came to Stanford and fell into AI, as many of us do, and started asking questions about the intersection of AI and media, AI and creativity, and symbolic systems has been really formative in that as well, because I think creativity is not just about the work we're creating, but also kind of the consciousness and the person you bring to that work. So.
Thank you.
So in our next segment, I guess we'll begin some questions for you and also maybe for all of us. So I think in keeping with kind of the question we started with, it's like what in the world, how do we even define this thing we call creativity? Lots of people are looking at generative AI tools and calling them or their output creative. What do we make of this, right? That's one question. And maybe Srinija will, with that, maybe we'll begin this question. I know you've talked about this, you've written about this. For you, like what is creativity, and how might you distinguish that between, say, creativity and something like innovation?
Yeah, so we'll go straight into the heart of something that is often difficult to bring into the academy, because in Western culture there is a strange divide between spirit and science. And in my Hindu cosmology and in most non-Western cultures, this doesn't exist. They live happily side by side. And for me, I can't think and talk about creativity without invoking something beyond myself. There's something ineffable, numinous. Some might call it muse, some might call it spirit or God, but for me, creativity goes to a human capacity that is born of billions of years of evolution to this particular manifestation of consciousness that allows me some relationship, some access under certain conditions to something transcendent. It is a source of creation, creativity. So, and when I'm accessing that, and when I'm allowing that to operate through me, I am creative. I manifest things that maybe didn't exist before. So this, I've written about positing that what if, so maybe we call innovation tinkering, making new things out of old things, starting from what's happened before and deriving something novel. And AI, which in these large language models, the current zeitgeist of AI is data science in big scale. Data science and AI are about the past. They're about the past, right? Like by definition, data, every piece of data, every datum is something that's already finished. So we're dealing with the past. And we can do all kinds of amazing things in establishing a greater shared collective awareness and understanding of who we've been by expanding the data set and the quality of that set of the past, but it's the past. And to me, all kinds of innovation can happen from there, but it's all going to be premised on what's happened before, on what's come before. And creativity for me goes to something sacred. It goes to a numinous realm of unknowable, not just not yet known, but unknowable. And in that relationship, I'm accessing a source of creation to make something out of nothing, to make something out of whole cloth.
It's going back to that first definition, to the power to create, like almost in the most fundamental way that we can imagine. But this is not how we tend to think about AI at large. Like, can you address that? Like, seems like they're just different.
So, and I think this is an underlying, almost like bifurcation in worldviews that we need to address head on when we're talking about AI and what's at stake and what do we want it to mean to be human and what do we want from AI. And really at the heart of this question of what is creativity, I think there are people who believe that we're bags of bones, that we're bundles of bags of bones with messy biology and chemistry in a pretty mechanistic universe. I think we are that. I just think that's a sliver of what we are. And if one believes that we're bags of bones, merely I'll say, I don't know how to have this conversation. We're in different places and we're going to ask different questions and we're going to ask different things of ourselves and each other and of the technology that we have manifested. I'm interested in starting from the premise that I'm more than a bag of bones and that through my consciousness, I am entangled in what all the wisdom traditions have told me is, a unity in the face of the illusion of separation. So that even my symbolic systems training for me was all about language and intelligence. Once I call that a chair, I've invoked chair, and chair only has meaning insofar as we agree on what is a chair and what is not a chair. In other words, I can't even cognize anything in this human form without having an underlying premise of all in the distinction. That makes sense? It's like the yin-yang duality that is separated but entangled. That's in everything through the human. But digital technology, computation, at its essence, isn't entangled with separation and unity. Digital technology reduces to the hard binary of 0 or 1. That's not how this thing works. That thing, the zeros and ones, can do amazing things. But they can't do something that this does. So that underlying premise, are we bags of bones or are we more, to me, separates how we can even have this conversation and what's at stake.
Yeah, this is quite interesting because I feel like I've, at some point, maybe not so long ago, maybe like when I was going to grad school, I think I was in that first group. I was in the mechanistic group. I was like, I couldn't wait to leave this imperfect bag of bones behind. But at some point, I do feel like, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out, I kind of slowed down and said, why do I want to do that? And I kind of I guess I began to really appreciate this imperfect bag of bones that is in here. And so this is, for me, this is a continuing, thank you for addressing that. But it's, I think maybe that is even in this building, right, in this institution in Silicon Valley, when we talk about AI, we seem to think about this mechanistic, what can AI do today that we couldn't do before, and now humans couldn't, now AI seemingly could do something close to that. I like this bifurcation way of thinking, and I think it seems like there could be a different balance that's struck. So yep.
I want to touch on one item you mentioned, like kind of this spirituality versus creativity. And something we talk about here at HAI is how these large models are all built, the big ones here in Silicon Valley. Do you think that some of these conversations around creativity would be different had they been built elsewhere around the world?
Completely. And I think this is why we need to address this head on. It doesn't mean that there's only one way to think about it. I'm humble enough to know that I don't know. These are big, big questions. They go to the unknowable for me. But I know that it is a profound consequence, whether I'm starting with this premise or that premise. And I know that most of the people that are guiding and leading our big tech and AI are mostly in a worldview that is more mechanistic, that is less spiritual, and therefore some things accompany that. Like, to me, there's a narrowed focus on what we are even here to do. We're knowers and solvers. And the purpose of my life is to know things and solve things. What if I'm not here to know or solve things? What if the purpose of life is to live it? Period, right? That if our best physics still puts 95% of all that is in this mystical thing called dark matter, is that just not yet known? Or is any of that unknowable? And if there is unknowable, do I have a relationship to unknowable? And if I don't, what kind of arrogance is going to make me the knower and the solver of things that are unknowable? And what happens when I try to do that? What do I extract from a planet that's giving me life when I think my job is to be the knower and the solver? Versus, what do I serve in improvisation with what gives me life when I have a relationship to the unknowable? So yes, I think it would be a different conversation. And I think that matters. Mm-hmm.
So interesting. I will continue. You're giving me kind of like an onstage crisis of like a personal crisis. And all of you here really just here for my therapy. Thank you all very much, and apologies. So hold this thought. I do want, thank you for making me, and I think all of us may be thinking about this. I do wonder if it's like the moment that I started really getting to music, philosophy, history, like the arts, that I really began to appreciate kind of like this thing that transcends the mechanistic problem-solving side. And actually, frankly, being an engineer, because I was, like Vanessa, I was trained as an engineer. And so for me, it's like, how do I solve, what's the problem? How do I state the problem? How do I solve the problem? But then the music came, I was like, wait, this is not a problem to be solved. We just need to make it. We just need to do it. So hold this thought. And Isabel, I want to see if you have any thoughts on this before I ask you. I have questions for you.
Totally. I actually want to build off what you were just saying about music and just making it. I think something that we don't talk about enough in creativity is the process that powers it. I think a lot of definitions of creativity are features of the output, right? There's this famous definition by Margaret Bowden, who's a psychologist, and she says being creative is the ability to make something novel, surprising, and valuable. But I think, as Go was saying, like, a lot of artists actually make because they're trying to express something about the world or learn something about themselves. And that's like an intrinsic value you get as of something. And I also think there's an epistemic value there, right? You're trying to achieve truth or knowledge about the world. And so I actually think creativity is going to show up in many different ways, just because it's like a nebulous word like intelligence. We haven't defined intelligence, even though we're trying to. And so I think machines might end up being creative in a particular way, or we might end up calling them creative in a particular way. But I also think it's really important to come back to this idea of process and what making something or creating something gives back to the person who does it.
Mm-hmm. So on that, Isabel, I know you've been actually writing like a thesis on AI and creativity, like, you know, this term, and supervised by our very own John Etchemendy. And I know you've been working on an interview series, speaking with artists, filmmakers, writers, and researchers about generative AI. Just curious, what are some, you know, a few nuggets that you learned or noticed so far in that journey?
Totally. I think I have some like higher level nuggets and some practical things about how people are applying it. That's really interesting. So I think when you're on Twitter or in school or whatever, in kind of the more techie bubble, you see in film specifically, people are doing a lot of text to video work. It's really fascinating. It's really interesting. It kind of pushes towards a world where you might be able to generate a film on your computer. But then I've spoken to folks who are kind of engineers in the filmmaking world, right? They're visual effects editors, they've done a lot of work in Unreal. And I'm thinking about one conversation in particular where someone walked me through their workflow, and Stable Diffusion was just this tiny, tiny little part of it. But it enabled them to do their work much faster and to get to the point that they wanted to get to. And they were talking about how they were training a model on their own previous work. And it kind of made me realize that there's this difference sometimes between how professionals are starting to use these sorts of tools and the way it's being built for amateurs to kind of upskill if you hadn't had the skill to begin with. And I'm really, really curious about how professionals are embedding these tools and how that's actually going to transfer to kind of the everyday person and how we begin using these tools in our work. So that's something that I've noticed. And then Vanessa, you know, I'm thinking a lot about this, but have spoken to a lot of filmmakers, a lot of writers, and some of those folks are people who wrote about technology, right? In their writing or in their films, they're grappling with themes of tech and society and how technology will change our world. And in conversation, they have these either really utopian dreams about where technology might go, or also these dystopian commentaries. And I thought that was really fascinating. And what it made me reflect on is, today, the conversation is a lot about how generative AI and technology is changing the arts and changing the film world. And it's less about how filmmakers, writers, and storytellers have the power to shape technological development. And I think stories change the way we write policy, the way we do research. They impact our cultural imagination. And so I think there is so much to be done when you bring storytellers and technologists in a room together and empower people to be telling more interesting, more generative stories about AI.
Isabel, I have to say, ever since you've told me about all this, I think about it all of the time. Like whenever we think about AI and robots and stuff, I'm like, do we think about this in some because of Terminator and like Terminator, or like would we think about it differently? Anyway, yeah, it's really interesting.
Also, I also want to just signal boost something else. He seems to be making this kind of like, I don't know if it's a distinction between like generative AI as part of the workflow versus generative AI as the workflow. There seems to be like a very critical fundamental difference there. So I guess this could be both the practical nugget, but also anything else you want to add on.
Yeah, I think actually maybe tying in what I said earlier, I think process is really important, but also process changes. Like prompting is actually pretty hard. I've tried to create some images and then I realized like I can't create them because they weren't in the data set to begin with, because when I Google search an MRI eagle eye view, it doesn't come up, weirdly enough. And so I think these tools will introduce new processes, but the question is like, how do we give agency to the people who are creating it such that you still have this experience in which you are getting to some kind of truth or knowledge, and so that the work that you create is actually what you intended to create as opposed to maybe something else.
Super interesting. I work also with the prompt engineering, and then also part of me always often wonders, maybe this goes back to the bag of bones, is that like, it's like how much I actually love, it makes me miss working with my hands. It's like working for over 2 decades with computer music. Every time I make an instrument for like a laptop, for our laptop orchestra, it makes me sometimes think back to and often miss kind of the tactile feeling of just picking up my guitar, actually playing it. And so prompt engineering makes me wonder, it's like thinking about, wow, this is so astoundingly competent on one hand, potentially. On the other hand, it makes me wonder what kind of muscles would actually atrophy if this was like the way that we kind of just move through the world. And back to the bag of bones, I'm like, yo, have y'all tried working with your hands? Have y'all tried eating? I mean, also like, I'm like, have y'all tried, I mean, there's so many things that are, this bag of bones makes life so rich and interesting.
And I just feel, also say both talked about the process and about what a professional who wears growing in relation to this bag of bones, because if we see the AI as the answer, if it's the finish line, if it's the place you go to for what to do, how to be your answer ourselves, now it's over, right? The dialogue's over. If the AI is the interlocutor to help then spark, fire something back to us, I gotta bring the wholeness of my being, the bag. I gotta bring the bag of bones and all this stuff into it. And when I do that, then the capacities of the AI are just that, they're the capacities. But I world-class improvisers and artists that are finding spark and inspiration from their relationship to the AI. That gives me great. It's infinite developable, but it comes from all kinds of ways of knowing. I have the LLM's large models are all about listening. They're things that can get fitted through language, through analytical, rational, based intellect and language. That's a way of only practical way. Oh,
Is it?
but I'll turn off this. Let's see, this is a big tech challenge. But I have all these other ways of knowing that are happening right now because we're in analog and room together. I have experiential ways of knowing, emotional ways of knowing, ways of knowing, spiritual ways of knowing, that code to the what happens when I use my hands that's different than just conceptual. They're all generative, and they're all part of what makes my intelligence. So the AI is just a supercharged capacity in one aspect. And that's awesome because now if I think about what am I using it for, not to get the answers, but to stoke and invite me to expand and explore all my other capacities, I have no idea what happens when I start to do that. I can't wait to find out when I start to do that.
So that kind of reminds me too of something that you mentioned. I don't remember which episode it was, but around like there are these tools, but artists tend to use tools in ways that they weren't meant to be used. And I agree with you. I'm very excited to see kind of how humans as creatives start to use some of the AI tools in ways that we can't really imagine.
So as we wrap up this segment and go to the next one, it seems like I pull out kind of maybe a couple of things to think about. Bag of bones, something to take away. Feel free to think about bags of bones ourselves. 2, I think something about like the process versus the product. I think this is something to really think about. And 3, I'm also getting this from both of what you're saying. It's like, there's like a nuanced balance, I think, that we are still searching for between ourselves and our creations, in this case, AI, right? And it's not to say like, let's all completely jump in and become AI, nor is it shun AI and shut the door firmly shut, but rather there should be room. There should be room left for us in that. And there should also be room maybe left for AI, in that. So I'll just leave that thought there.
Great. So with that, kind of related to this process output discussion, I wanted to pose a thought experiment to our two guests here. So we think, so in front of the Louvre, there are people who are painting the Mona Lisa, drawing inspiration from the art they saw within the Louvre. And then there's also these large language models who ingest a bunch of data, and some would say draw inspiration from the data that they have ingested. How do you both think about that differently? Is it different? Is it not? Like, how do we think about that?
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the most obvious points here is that it's a question of scale, right? If you're outside the Louvre or the Met and you're painting something and you're replicating it or drawing it in the style of, requires a certain amount of time and attention to detail and skill. And now all of a sudden we have these models and you can do it in essentially an instant. And I think the difference in scale there, that all of a sudden, yes, we've been replicating work for a long time, but you can do it so quickly and at such a high volume, does kind of start to incite a little bit of a fear. And I think it's a really understandable fear, because then you start to get into questions of labor and fairness and really, really tough, gnarly ones that I will not try to break down right now. But I think there's a second part of this conversation that's also about the perspective that you bring. So I think humans or people, when they're making art, often are making it from a particular point of view, right? You're drawing from your own experiences and you're trying to express something about those experiences. But a model, a large language model, for example, doesn't have those experiences the same way we have them to draw on. And it definitely doesn't have like a particular perspective, right? Like my perspective changes over time, but it has one like linear thread. A model, you can prompt it and it can do all sorts of different things and be all sorts of different things. And so I think right now that's kind of a difference between what it means for me to make an image or a piece of writing and what it means for a model to do that.
And I'd add to that, I love all of that. It makes me think about your young would-be artists or artists painting the Mona Lisa outside. And in the jazz tradition, kind of assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is to transcribe somebody else's improvised solo and then rehearse that and first write it and rehearse that. Why do we do that? And Miles Davis said it takes a long time to sound like yourself. Mm-hmm. Because something about how we cognize and learn about ourselves and discover our unique capacities and gifts has to do with relating to other. And it starts by just being exposed to lots of other ways of thinking, being, doing, knowing, and trying them on, like labels. You stick them on, you take them off, and then you form a sense of self. And you begin to refine and hone what's the Srinija shaped hole in this conversation? Because you're here for a reason and I'm here for a reason. There is an implicate order hidden that we together can strive towards. And I can't do it by myself and you can't do it by yourself. So that's again where AI is, to me, like, I'm a city girl. I love the density of urban environments because you mash up all of these different things and it's so much stimulus to react and respond to then come back and question, and who am I? And the AI to me is just like biggest city ever, take all of our past and have access shared to all these examples to transcribe and rehearse, try on as I reflect, who am I? And then who do I need to be so you can be who you're meant to be?
I've done my share of transcribing. I've done my share of copying or just like learning something that the grades have done, so to speak. I often wonder if it's like, what kind of realize in that also to add to this is that, I don't know, like, it's not about getting back to the Mona Lisa. It's actually about trying to see through the eyes of the person who did the thing. And when you do the thing that someone else has done, you go through the same process. I think you're actually borrowing like vantage points. You're borrowing like a way to see the world, and it's like an embodied way. And it's, for me, like as someone that actually now very loves to imitate. But I wonder, But that's not what AI is doing. It's not seeing. It's just regurgitating patterns, albeit in a very like nuanced, competent sometimes way. So I don't know. I don't know where that leaves us, but I do have to say, like, I think this.
For me, it leaves us with this question of what do we want from the AI in the creative world, and what does the creative world want from AI? And what I don't want from it is the answer, is the song, is the novel. I don't want that. I mean, I can use all of that, but what I want from it is the spark, is the catalyst, is the aid, is the co-creator, the enabler that adds to all the other things that are inspiring who I am and how I'm walking around in the world, to come back to what else is there here? What are all the capacities I can explore and expand and evolve in relationship? So it's like, what is my relationship to it? What am I asking of it? Those are the most important questions, because if I'm asking of it the answers, I'm going to get a future based on the past.
And Srinija, I know you've written a bit about this too, but this kind of reminds me kind of the difference between like innovation or creativity. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is this notion that to me, innovation, or I use the word innovation, Silicon Valley, you know, I was at Yahoo for 15 years, we're in the front lines of the dawning of a web. And I would say we innovated a lot of things, but it's all innovation is standing on the shoulders of what's come before. It's building, tinkering around what has happened before. It's saying by what values or what metrics am I trying to improve the situation, and I can innovate on what's come before. And it's how we use these words. It comes back to the categories. Do we agree what's in the category of creativity and innovation? But just for the purposes of this conversation, what if innovation is what's building on what's come before, and creativity is creation. Creativity is accessing the creative source that allows me to make something out of whole cloth, something that's never existed before. It's very closely tied to imagination. Merriam-Webster thought so too. Imagination is the creative power of consciousness. It's conceptual creativity, right? And I cannot be creative without imagination first. It starts here. But isn't it amazing that from my consciousness, I manifest whole new things in ideas, in thoughts and language, in the world? To me, that's where I would draw a line.
Well,
I think when we're thinking about kind of what the relationship between machines and humans, especially in artistic sense, what that might look like, what this co-creation might look like, I also think it's an interesting challenge to ask, like, what can AI and these huge data sets notice in the patterns in the world that we cannot, right? Like, I just cannot comprehend all the data that goes into an LLM. It's just never going to happen. But that's a really unique and interesting trait. And right now, these models are essentially copying what humans do. But like, how do you flip that a little bit so you get something that only the model could have noticed or could have seen? And I think that's an interesting provocation.
Yes, and I think that I love this. I think that totally goes like the social sciences, as they're getting more into big data analysis. It's so useful to see large swaths of examples of human behavior over time, where the human brain in our scale could only grasp so much. But to be able to, yes, uplift, reveal patterns that have been there all along might help us understand some of the hardest questions. Like, I want to know, the only problem I want to solve is, how do we love each other more? If I understood more about where that breaks down and where that works, maybe I could start to practice and put myself into the conditions. If I could answer that question, or if I could use the technology to help me, to remind me and inspire me and challenge me on that, I think all the other things that we're trying to solve for would kind of dissipate.
I mean, it gets to the point about like the augment versus replace. Like, if we can use these models to augment our ability to love and care, versus thinking about what parts of the human it can replace, and thinking about what humans are good at versus machines are good at can really help guide the conversation. And that, as I've been having more conversations, I find it difficult to kind of articulate, like, what is it that the machines are good at versus what is it that the humans are good at? But I think if we can use that as kind of like our guiding principle, it could be interesting.
I'm just continually having here, just sitting quietly in crisis here. I'm like, are we doing so much of this like backwards in a way, right? Because in here, you're going back to this point on kind of, well, consciousness, where the hell that is, right? Like this idea that there's a thing, it's one thing to like do something that looks like another thing. It's a different matter altogether to do something that helps you to see things. There's a fundamental difference, it seems, between looking and seeing. And, you know, if I were to go, I mean, I've never tried to paint the Mona Lisa, to kind of imitate that. But I imagine the people who are doing it aren't trying to just get to the product that looks like the Mona Lisa. I think they are, there's a perspective that needs a kind of a consciousness behind it to then use that as a tool to kind of see what did Leonardo, what did he see? You know, that's a question that it's a good question. Anyway, so please continue. I'll just quietly be here in crisis.
I was going to say, I think we're about 5-10 minutes left. Do you want to do some of the closing remarks or questions?
Sure. It seems like we've only begun the conversation, but I'm hoping a couple of things I think we can already take away, and I want to encourage everyone here to keep thinking, keep asking the questions. One, I think the bag of bones, process versus product. I think looking versus seeing, this bifurcation of like, what do we really want from AI? Like, is it the mechanistic, like, get me out of this body already, do the thing that, or is it like something about celebrate, like we are, and through this, I don't know. I mean, the questions isn't like, what can AI do for me? It's always, how in the world are we going to live with our technologies? And to your point, through our technologies, how can we continue to live with one another? So I guess I have some closing questions for the two of you, and it's an even more open-ended question. I'm actually curious, you know, what are the questions you would have for all of us, that, you know, one or two questions that maybe you want us to ask ourselves when it comes to what do we want from AI and creativity?
For me, you know, this question of what does it mean to be human and what do we want? Well, what does it mean to be human has been relegated to philosophy departments and academies for a really long time. And it is now a pressing, urgent question for everyone to engage with because, like it or not, we are co-creating the capacities to determine what it's going to mean to be human. That's happening. Bioengineering, AI, all of these things. Since we're doing that, maybe we should think about what we want from it. So what do we think it means to be human? What do we want it to mean to be human? And then, so that's like the big question to me is, you know, I would like to talk to each and all of you. Where do you fall on this question of this bifurcation that I posited? Because that will help inform me about, like, well, where can we go in this conversation? And then what's at stake based on the fact of where we stand in that question?
Thank you. Isabel.
I think the more I think about this, the more questions I have. But one that is maybe more tangential to this question of creativity that's more rooted in art is something I'm really curious about, is how models are going to change aesthetics and how much control we have over that and how much control models will have. So I think it is this kind of co-creative relationship, but we should be really aware as it moves forward. And so starting to notice a few things and starting to see and starting to imagine how, like, the internet might change with an influx of images. But the question for me is, how's the media we consume, how is that going to change?
Well, Vanessa, anything you want to add for us?
I don't know. Like you.
I don't either. I think we're just.
Yeah, no, thank you both. It has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure our audience has more they would like to discuss with you, and I do as well as we move forward. But I think that, yeah.
So I think that about wraps it for this segment, this third episode of OffScript, the HAI Vodcast. We will be back in 2024. We will return.
Likely in February.
Or likely in February or later. There's so my partner and I are having a baby due early January. So speaking of consciousness, there's a new one.
Creativity. What is creativity?
What is creativity?
I compare my 3-year-old to like the AI. Like he identifies all red trucks as fire trucks. Like your classification is off. We need to adjust.
I can't wait. So, and with that, I think on behalf of the Vodcast, HAI Vodcast team, we'd like to wish all of you wonderful holiday season. Savor it, savor family, savor consciousness, savor whatever creativity is. And with that, maybe just one round of applause for our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, thanks everyone.
We'll be around.
We'll be around. If you have any questions, want to chit chat, think about life, the universe, and everything.